Hey, EarthRoamer owners, I wanted to do a brief intro to this video. So Mark Cullifer, quite a while back, did a great write-up on replacing the hydronic hoses in the newer EarthRoamers. But when I got into doing mine, it looked like there was an opportunity to replace the heater hoses without dropping either of the fuel tanks. And that may be specific to the older units like mine, number 73, 2008 sort of vintage, plus or minus a few years. So I wanted to put this up there to augment what Mark had already put up, and an explanation that the reason for posting this video, it's not really meant to be a standalone video, and the text post that I put up in the EarthRoamer forum isn't really meant to be a completely standalone text post either. They kind of go together. Um, it's not a highly produced video with explanations to allow it to be standalone. So you're going to have to bear with it and read through some of the text. And then if you decide to take it on, or if you're trying to decide whether you want to take it on, then have a look at the video or parts of the video. And I think between the two, you'll get a real good feel for what replacing the hydronic hoses in your truck involves, and decide whether you want to do it or not. So anyway, I hope this provides some useful information for you, and you can always PM me or post on the forum if you need more information.
So you can see my fuel gauge is almost empty. Now that's the front tank, the 50-gallon tank. I ran that down really low because I didn't know if I was going to end up having to drop that. Now I'll come over here and switch to the rear tank and have a look here, and you can see that's even lower, so virtually empty. 15 millimeter on here. We've got a little more length now, and let's see if we can get these guys loose. There we go. That's what I needed. So we'll take this bolt out. What do you think? Are you going to help? I don't think you're very much help. So it just starts moving. And a couple inches. And I'm going to stop it there. So these are the shoulder bolts that I think I mentioned earlier that I'm using to hang the what would be the front end of the tank, and these have worked out really well. This saved me a lot of effort in being able to move the tank around. There's enough play in them. They're about 4 inches long. This is probably longer than it needs to be, but you want them to be a much smaller diameter than the hole itself, than the threaded hole, and enough length to let you drop it down. So I don't know, anywhere between like 3 to 4 inches is probably good enough, and with a washer obviously to keep it from slipping through here. But this allows you not to lose control of the front end of the tank, so that you don't snap these tubes off, and also it lets you push around the tank to get access to running the tubes, as well as to refitting the fill line and vent tube on the fuel tank itself. But the aha moment here is, now that I have all this room, I've got my tank tilted down, I can see all my lines that I need to. So you can see it coming through the frame rail up there, and then coming all the way back to my tubes here. So here's where we are now with the tank. It's tilted down, it's on the jack, stable. Still have my bolts up in the front, so that holds that front end so it's not going anywhere. So what I decided to do is just pull that vent tube and filler, the vent line and the filler line out of that hole and leave it down here on the other side of the frame, and that gives me much better access to running my heater lines that you can see a whole lot better now running down the frame rail there. So that's the plan. So you can see two of them coming up there with the orange silicone heat shield tubing on them. This first one is just an elbow connection here. So, but it's one of those crimped heater clamps. So I'm just going to cut that with a Dremel and remove that one. And then this one, if you can see there, just has a hose clamp on it. So I'm going to undo that and then pull both of these lines off and pull them down through the engine compartment there and start cutting the gazillion zip ties and separating it from all the other brake lines and electrical harnesses that are run along the frame rail. Shouldn't be too bad though. Right before we pull our lines off, I want to go ahead and get the pressure out of the system here. So bleed that off. It's been sitting for a while, so maybe there isn't really any pressure, but just cover all of our bases. If you've got some heat in your system when you're doing this, make sure that you depressurize it before you pull these tubes off. So you just have to slit them a little bit, and then they come right off for the most part. These are crimped so tight that they're embedded in the hose. So there you go. I carry this in my kit. That's a battery powered one. I've got 2 batteries for it, and it's a nice lightweight compact tool that's great to have for lots of different uses. Getting these crimp clamps off is one of them. So I've marked one of these hoses so I know which one goes where, so I don't plumb this thing backwards when I get the new replacement hose up there. So I've just used a paint marker here to mark this one. With the newer trucks, as Mark indicated, I guess they're 3/4 and 5/8, but mine is a 2008 6.4, and it has both the tubing is 3/4, both the heater hose running back is 3/4. So when you do this and take those 2 lines off that are in the engine compartment, you probably want to have a bucket underneath there. I put a bucket and some cardboard underneath here just to catch some of the coolant. You won't get a lot, but there'll be a little bit in the lines. All right, we've got the coolant lines separated from the engine up there, and now we're going to go and cut some of these tie wraps off and see if we can't snake these lines down through here. There are a number of tie wraps. We'll put all these back in, and you'll notice that there's the silicone orange tubing here. It's probably a good idea to make sure that you get all this back in place. There's a lot of heat up here in the engine compartment area, so you want to make sure and put this tubing back. So as you can see, the silicone tubing that serves as a heat shield on the heater hose ends right here, just after the transfer case. So, and they've run it all the way pretty much to the end. As you saw, it came up into the engine compartment where the connections are. So I don't really need to worry too much about marking the tubing to getting it in, to get it back in the exact position. We'll just go ahead and run our tubing, route it through, and somewhere along in this area here, we'll slide this silicone heat shield back and tape it off like they have here. So right now I'm just going to go through here and untape all this and slide it off of the tubing so that I've got a smaller diameter to pull through the back end of the truck. Alright, so I have my tubing out of the frame up to the point it goes behind the auxiliary fuel tank. This fuel tank I'm going to leave in place because I think I can get the tie wraps cut and get the tubing snaked behind it down the frame rail, and it'll save me a lot of headache by not pulling this down. So what I'm going to do now is I'll strip this heat shield off of the black heater hose. Right, I have the silicone heat shield pulled off of here, and just wanted to show those people that have older rigs like mine with the 6.4s in them in the 2008 vintage that this is both 3/4 line coming from the engine compartment and making the return trip. Alright, so we have our connection. One of the connections to the water heater is still crimped, so we're going to cut these crimps off of there and replace this tube, this down tube from the water heater, as well as there's a second one return line that we're going to replace. So we'll cut these off just like we did before and continue on. Alright, we've got our bucket up there. Let's get this hose pulled off. No safety glasses on in case we get so not much at all. Maybe just a few ounces came out. That's good. Surprised there wasn't more, but we got it. Okay, so now there's a couple more crimp clamps, as you can see here, but we're not going to worry about those because we're going to disconnect this hose, and this should be a 5/8 hose coming from the water heater. We're going to disconnect that up there and pull that thing right down through the floor. Well, it's got a fair amount of RTV that's sealing the hole through the floor, but with a little bit of pulling that should pop right out of there, and we'll re-silicone our RTV, the one that we put down through. So now we've got this end free, and we'll work on this other end over here and get that one free. And I think we may want to pull these hoses out forward. Got a lot of hose up there and less hose back here, and it might be easier to kind of free up this and just pull everything forward when we get ready to. All right, mounted up almost underneath the bumper here is our S-bar hydronic heater. So this is a diesel powered heater, diesel fueled heater that's connected into this whole circuit. So this allows you to heat up your hot water in your water heater, as well as heat your engine block if it's really cold. All right, so we have the two rear connections loose, And now we just need to figure out the best way of getting these out of the truck while making sure we can get the new tubing into the truck. I'm pulling out the hoses now, and originally I thought I was going to use these hoses to perhaps pull the new hoses back along the frame rail behind this transfer flow auxiliary tank. But I think I've made a different decision now. All right, so we have one of the hoses out here. So let's pull the rest of this out. This is a longer run here. All right, so we now have this one out, and I want to show you something that's kind of concerning right here. So this is a long run, and the pressure drop associated with fluid in a tube like this is a function of the diameter and the length of run. So we already have a long run. This is not a high pressure system. And they run it through an area that's so tight that this is almost, you can see that, this is almost punched all the way through. And you can see this big dent on this side as well. So if you look at it on cross section here, this was pinched, almost closed off like that. And here you have this nice big 3/4 inch ID tube that looks like it was pinched down to, I don't know, maybe a quarter, and up against a sharp, relatively sharp object right there that put that big dent in there, and it looks like it's starting to cut into the tube. So this is another reason why I'm not going to run this tube back the same place that it was originally run when they built the truck. Hopefully they've improved on that in the newer trucks, but this is a serious concern. So this was completely buried behind the transfer flow tank, so you can get a leak back there, and you wouldn't be able to get access to it. So as you can see, I've got the orange insulating sheath over it, and I've got a little bit more tube to run back here, but essentially it's going to come from the engine compartment in exactly the same route that it did, come down this frame rail here, which is easy access. You can see the entire thing, easy to get your hands in there. But instead of tucking it in behind this transfer flow tank and having it, one, squished up against the frame rail, which is what was causing my pinch point, but also not being able to really access it, I decided just to route it over the top of the transfer flow tank. It's a nice smooth surface that runs the full length of the tank. There's a gap about that big, big enough for the tubing with some extra room to get your hands in there, that runs the full length between the underbody of the truck and the top of the transfer flow tank. There's no sharp points, there's no kink points. It's just a nice smooth run all the way down. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the rest of this tube through. I'll pull a little bit more. Okay, so we have our fuel tubes snapped back into their bracket, and we've got our small diameter hanger bolts out and the original bolts hand tight back in, and now we're ready to let down the tank, or the jack. this out of here. So all of these hanger bolts for the fuel tank were Loctited when I pulled them out, and I'm gonna re-Loctite them now that I'm putting them back in. It's really handy to have a long extension to get back, especially at these rear, or would it be the front bolts on the tank. It's always a good idea whenever you're doing projects like this. At least what I like to do is whenever I'm underneath the truck taking stuff apart, crawling around, I just look at things and pay attention to any wear and tear, any signs of oil leaks or damage underneath the truck that needs to be addressed. So again, the nice thing about these EarthRoamers is there's plenty of space underneath, so you can wheel around underneath it no problem and have a good look at everything. All right, so the next phase in this project is to replumb the water heater. So I've taken the shelf out and all the insulation out, and now we have access to the inlet and outlet. So right here and right down here. This is the tubing I took off of the water heater nipples, and I can literally just take and peel this stuff apart easily without much effort. So it doesn't give me a lot of confidence that that tubing would have lasted a real long time. Alright, so we cut the bands off the heater hoses on the inside and separated those from the water heater. So now we just need to pull these tubes down through the floor, and after we do that, we can run our new tube up there. So these are just RTV'd in through the floor. So I twisted them a little bit to get them freed up. And there we go. So you can see the RTV on them. Right, so we've got the second hose. We just need to pull down from above here. I did the same thing, just sort of twisted it around to try to break loose some of the RTV, and then it should come out. Oh, there we go. That one wasn't in there as well as the other one. And there we go. You can kind of see the plug where the RTV was. Okay, so we have our hoses coming up through the floor. You can see that one, and then that one over there. And the one in the back, this one down here, is 5/8 from here down through the floor and then directly into the S-bar hydronic heater, because it also has a 5/8 connection. So there's no splices in this one. It goes directly from here to the S-bar hydronic heater. This one, you can see the splice down there at the bottom. This connects in from the front of the truck. So it was a nice press fit to push the 3/4 inch line up through the floor. So I did that and then adapted it here to the 5/8 that's needed to go into the water heater. So, and then we have a little anti-kink spring there that we put back on that EarthRoamer originally put in there. So I think we're in good shape in the hot water tank box. And now I'll just put a little bit of RTV around the hole penetrations. This one is such a tight press fit with the 3/4 line that I probably won't be able to really get any RTV in that one, but I can get some around that 5/8 line in the back. So here's that rear 5/8 line that I was talking about that comes down directly from the water heater and goes straight into the top connection there on the S-bar. And then this line comes from the front of the truck and connects into the bottom fitting here, but because the truck has 3/4 and the S-bar has 5/8, I put a brass union there that just connects the two. So we adapt it right at the end, which gives us our maximum 3/4 inch line length, which is what we're after. And then this is the line coming also from the front of the truck. That's 3/4 line. And as I mentioned, it's a nice press fit right up through the floor there. So I don't really think I even need to RTV that. I might put just a tiny bit around the end there. But then that comes up through the floor and then is adapted right before it goes into the water heater down to 5/8. All right, so I've got all my connections made. Now just doing a final flush of the system here with water first, just to flush out any particles and stuff I got in the tubing when I shoved it up through the flooring. And it's been sort of kicking around, dragging around underneath the truck, so I just want to make sure that I get all those particles out of there first. Then I'll come back through and flush it with 50/50 coolant. And in case any of you are wondering what that yellow balloon is there, I actually used 2 yellow ones, one there, one down at the bottom, 2 balloons to plug off the open pipes under the hood, just so I didn't get any wasps or bugs or anything inside the lines while they've been open for a couple of days here on the weekend. So I've given it a good flush with just plain water, and I've blown out most of the water already, just using a air nozzle here and putting it in the tube. A little spitting there, but that looks like it's got pretty much all of it. So now I'll go ahead and fill this tube. Probably just use gravity and a funnel. Just fill this tube with 50/50 coolant, and then top off my tank if I need to. All right, I've rinsed it out, blown it out with the compressed air, and now we'll put 50/50 pre-diluted coolant in it. This is the same type that it's already filled with. Just hesitating here for a minute because I'm going to have to lower these tubes down to make my connections, but I think I'll just use a clamp and clamp them off. And really the length of these hoses is why I'm so happy to get those changed out to this new hose with a new route, because the current route, as I showed you earlier, had the hose pinched off, and I would bet that there wasn't more than there probably wasn't more than an 1/8 of an inch, maybe a 1/4 of an inch, but probably not even a 1/4 of an inch of gap inside the tube because it was pinched so severely. So if you think about that coolant having to make this 50-foot round trip and having one section of it severely pinched, you know, the way the
pressure drop goes in a tube is a function of how many constrictions there are in the tube and the overall length of it. So each time you have a restriction via just fittings or via pinch points like this, or a tight turn where the tubing might be a little bit collapsed on itself, it just goes to show that this tube is really, really long, and you don't want any more restrictions than you absolutely have to. So I kind of like the idea of running 3/4 all the way down to the back, and then only splicing in where I had to with 5/8, but most of the way is a return trip with 3/4 inch tube. So I don't know that it'll make a change or difference in my oil temps or not, but it certainly can't hurt, so I'm interested to try that out. So what I've decided to do before I start the truck is I'm going to use the hydronic circuit, which one of the functions of it is to heat up the engine block before you start it in cold weather. So I thought I might as well use the hydronic heater and the coolant loop to go ahead and flush the rest of the system through, and I'm hoping that that'll get most of the air out. So we'll come over here and turn on the hydronic heater. Focus, there we go. So we'll just punch this button here and get it started. I won't run it for a full 60 seconds or 60 minutes, but we'll go ahead and run it for a little bit and watch the tank. So you can hear the hydronic heater firing up. So that's firing up. Now we're gonna go have a look at the coolant reservoir and see what we got going here. I'm going to loosen this cap. So all my bubbles can come out. So I've got my hand on the tubing here and I can feel the fluid flowing through it and it vibrating on both lines. You can feel the tubing is already warm. Alright, since our coolant reservoir here is at the highest point in the coolant system, all the bubbles should come up to this point. So the hydronic heater, when it was running in a recirculating fluid, should have flushed most of the air, trapped air, up into this region and bubbled out up in the tank here. Now I'm just going to go ahead and start the truck and see if we can't get it warmed up and the rest of the air out of the system. Alright, so our coolant temp and oil temps coming up together, 114, 113, and I think that's about all I'm going to do here parked, and we'll go take it for a test drive and really get this thing heated up and hope that we don't see any leaks.